Pearse Doherty.
Agus is fi ré le haar na blianta gur chaid rialtas fi na fáil agus fan na géal go hálk le cantra tuaithe ar fud an stéit agus léiríonn an dóil lebseil sibh an storm is déanaí an ceisio rís ach le rudaí dhéanú níos massa tá na budí móras an bord solar lechtras in isise ré go gaithí greagaí na tíre seo daoine bhí foice gan leachtrachas go gaithí siad bilí níos airde i dhéal chun an dámaiste a chóirú so caiithir stop a thurla seo a tháinaiste. Tánaiste, it's fair to say that down throughout the years, both Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael governments have successively gave a raw deal to rural Ireland. At times, rural communities have been treated as almost second-class citizens. And with the formation of your most recent government, we see the sidelining of rural Ireland and the West continues with just one minister from all of Connacht Ulster and no minister for the border counties at all. So well done. Yourself and Micheál Martin have managed to pull off together perhaps the most East Coast-centric government ever. Now, rural people are well used to getting the cold shoulder from the government, but in the aftermath of the most recent storm, we've seen this disrespect and marginalisation in its sharpest, most disastrous form. The government's sluggish and shoddy response to the devastation and the hardship that was caused by the storm in rural Ireland says it all. Your failure to treat it as a national crisis meant communities were left with significant difficulties just to meet basic needs. And that was to be seen right across rural Ireland. So many experienced real isolation in the absence of power, water, light, heat and telecommunications. And apart from the heroic efforts of ordinary workers, community activists and those in our local authorities and utility companies, the reality is that most communities had to fend for themselves as the government failed to grasp the severity of the situation. And the reason we see this slack response from government is because rural communities and those who live there simply don't matter in the eyes of this government. That sense of abandonment and anger is very real. And now, to add insult to injury, we have the top brass of the ESB effectively bullying those who suffered the most. It beggars belief that the CEO of the ESB came out and said that its customers would have to foot the bill for damage to the network caused by the storm. This is ahead of a company that made profits of €898 million in 2023, telling the people in rural Ireland, many of them who went without electricity for 2 weeks, that they have to cough up in the form of higher bills. What planet is he living on? And let me be clear, it is the ESB who should be compensating customers for the amount of time that they went without power. And to fund the repair of the network, its first port of call needs to be the massive profits that the ESB have accumulated of ripping off customers with some of the highest electricity prices in the EU for the last number of years. And Taoiseach, people are really angry about this. The top brass of the ESB need a wake-up call, and the people are asking, why isn't the government giving it to them? Clearly, the head honchos at the ESB are not prepared to let a good crisis go to waste in boosting profits. So the government needs to come off the bench in this, Taoiseach. You need to get on the pitch. You need to start protecting people from the impacts of this storm and making sure that the storm is not used as an excuse by ESB to gouge customers even further. So what does that mean? It means hauling in the ESB senior management. It means sitting them down and making it very clear to them that those whose lives have been rocked by the storm are not the people who are going to be forced to fork out in order to cover up the failures and mismanagement of the ESB in the first instance. And indeed, ESB should be compensating those customers who was left without electricity, in many cases, some for up to 2 weeks.
Thank you, Deputy Taoiseach, to respond.
Thanks very much, Ceann Comhairle, and thank you to Deputy Doherty for raising this important question. There's no doubt this storm has caused significant chaos and significant hardship in many, many parts of this country, but the Deputy is also right, disproportionately so in the west and northwest of the country. And I think we're all collectively relieved in Ireland, most particularly those communities, that the power is finally back. And the Trojan work, and I know you'll join me in this, the Trojan work that's been carried out by ESB workers on the front line, and indeed others, local authority workers, Uisce Éireann workers and others, in assisting people, has been very, very, very important, and we should commend and thank them for that. I want to say that. I do want to make one point, and I said this last week. I do think the comments of the Chief Executive of the ESB made in perhaps a moment of haste or error, were insensitive, and I welcome the fact. That he was big enough and decent enough to come out and acknowledge that himself and apologise for the insensitivity of those comments. I think that's important in public life. Any of us can say something in error or say something that's insensitive, and it's important to put your hands up after and say that that could have been said in a much better way. We'll come back and debate on another day, perhaps, the ministerial presence in the West and the North West. And I won't, in the interest of time, name all my colleagues who serve with diligence in a variety of roles in government. I'll come back to that another day, because I don't think we should actually make the storm a point of political division. In fact, what I've seen over the last period of time, over the last number of weeks, is this government work with people the length and breadth of Ireland. Indeed, Sinn Féin ministers were on to me looking for assistance from our government to help with the situation in terms of the storm in Northern Ireland as well, because this wasn't a storm the storm wasn't partisan, by the way. This was a storm that involved everybody of all political persuasions who held office, putting their shoulder to the wheel, working with agencies and working with communities in the interest of trying to keep people safe. And I must say, a lot was done right. We have to be very conscious of the fact that because there was that red weather warning alert, lives were definitely saved in Ireland. And of course, I think, in saying that, I think and acknowledge the loss of the life of Casper Dudek in your own constituency. Of course I do. But the warning system worked. What we do need to get much better at, Deputy, is preparedness and resilience at a community level. And I think, if we're being honest with each other, there are parts of the country, even counties that were badly affected, there were some badly affected counties that did better than others, perhaps, in being prepared at that local level and having access to generators and having their local management plans. And certainly, as part of the government review that we'll kick off shortly, we will need, I think, to look at what needs to be done at that local level to build up preparedness. Today, the Taoiseach and myself have convened a meeting of relevant government ministers to begin to look at exactly that. How do we better prepare for the next storm? How do we better prepare for more adverse weather conditions in the future? I would just say, on the financial side, because you referenced obviously the financial situation, we did indeed, a minister from the West in Derek Calleary did lead with the government's humanitarian assistance scheme, where we did provide significant financial assistance to many thousands of people to try and help them in a desperately difficult situation. A situation where the lights weren't on, a situation where people were trying to still feed and mind children and older people and the care needs, and a lot was done in relation to that. There's a lot of work to be done in regards to this. I'm very clear too that the ESB shouldn't and won't be gouging any customers in relation to this. They do have significant resources. Government intends to also invest significant resources in improving infrastructure. And we all now, every state agency, commercial and otherwise, every government department and every local authority needs to now take the lessons of this storm and be more prepared for future weather events.
Thank you, Deputy.
It's not a case of whether the ESB will be gouging them in the future. The ESB have been gouging customers for years. People in your constituency, my constituency, right across the state, pay amongst the highest electricity costs in Europe. ESB made profits, remember, last 2013, the last calendar year we have, of €898 million. This is a significant amount of profits. In the first 18 months, €1.3 billion has been transferred by individuals paying their electricity bills to the ESB. There is serious amounts of costs in terms of ESB bills, not in terms of running costs and standing charges. And the CEO of ESB said his comments were insensitive, but he hasn't ruled out that in 2026 that these costs will be borne by customers. And what I'm saying to you is, I'm asking you to stand up for people who were left without electricity for weeks on end, and to make it clear to the ESB top brass that there will be no increases as a result of this here. And not only that, that we expect the ESB to compensate people. Remember, the ESB, during the term of your last government, were fined €37 million for the failures in supply. They need to start compensating people, and they need to show some humility. So I'm asking you, will you call in the top brass of the ESB, and will you make those points to them?
Well, thanks very much, Deputy Doherty. And the long and the short answer is yes, we will be engaging with the ESB, and we will, in line with our programme for government commitment, be engaging on the issue of energy costs overall. Now, I can point to a number of measures, Ceann Corda, that the last government and indeed that this current government have and will be taking in relation to assisting people with their energy costs. You'll remember, in the time of the last government, a number of measures were taken to assist people in the here and now with the cost of the bills around energy credits. And you'll know that they were welcomed by your own constituents and mine and people right across the country too. You'll know that in the programme for government, we've also made commitments in relation to keeping that lower rate of VAT on energy bills as well, and providing people with that certainty for the period of time ahead. So these are the practical measures that we're taking right now to assist people with bills that, yes, can be large and can make people feel financially insecure. And government will be having a conversation in the round with all state agencies and actors in relation to energy prices going forward, and we're happy to constructively engage on this.
Thank you, Taoiseach. We move now to the Labour Group Leader, Deputy Ivana Bacik.
Taoiseach, Minister O'Donovan has had a string of bad luck with ministerial issues, a sort of reverse Midas touch. In his previous role, he had to deal with bike shelter and security hut overspends by the OPW. Now, weeks into his new job, we find out about this extraordinary and alarming spend of nearly €7 million on a failed IT project at the Arts Council. Taoiseach, this enormous waste of public money raises serious questions about governance at that body and about oversight. About what oversight, if any, the Arts Department and the Department of Public Expenditure had over such a major IT project, such a significant spend resulting in nothing. It raises questions about a cover-up by the last government, many of whose members are now serving in this cabinet. This unfortunate debacle, Taoiseach, must not be used to undermine support for the arts or for artists. Ireland's contribution to the arts is a source of immense pride. Our paintings, writings, music, film, theatre, comedy are an envy of the world, and many artists are not sufficiently rewarded for their work. We in Labour have always championed the arts. President Michael D. Higgins, now President, was an inspirational Labour Minister for the Arts. And we're conscious, I think, that many of those who are funded by the Arts Council will be worried today that their vital supports might now be undermined arising from this controversy. So, Taoiseach, you and Minister O'Donovan must now reassure artists that their funding will be protected and that we will see full disclosure and accountability for this overspend. Oireachtas committees have yet to be formed, so we need to have a debate on this in the Dáil next week. Because, Taoiseach, it appears that the entire management of this project was shambolic. I would question many aspects of governance and of management of the project at the Arts Council and indeed at the department too. And I think all of us have very serious questions arising from this issue. Here are some specific questions. First, why has the Arts Department been so dogged by controversies about overspends and lack of oversight over semi-states? Second, why was there no relevant expertise, it appears, on the Arts Council senior management team, leading to such undue reliance on private contractors to deliver this massive and complex project? Third, were red flags raised by those with knowledge of the project, and were those concerns ignored or dismissed? And I understand in particular that 2 reviews took place into this project which raised concerns about levels of risk, both in the summer of 2022 and again at the end of 2023. Can you explain why, particularly at that earlier juncture in 2022, a decision was apparently made to proceed with the project, notwithstanding serious concerns? And finally, can you commit that the review the Minister has ordered into the Arts Council, and we welcome the review, that review will include a root and branch review of governance and management systems? And Taoiseach, I do reiterate my call for a Dáil debate on this massive waste, which has caused such anger among the public.
Thank you, Deputy Taoiseach, to respond.
Well, thanks very much, Ken Cord. I think a Dáil debate would of course be useful, absolutely, and I agree with you. If we had committees established, and I hope we will very shortly, I'm sure there'd be very serious questions to be asked of the Arts Council, because breaching the public spending code can't be a consequence-free zone. It simply can't, and these issues are absolutely alarming, quite frankly. And you know, people can make mistakes in terms of the delivery of projects, and that's one thing. But it's very different when you actually just ignore the public spending code and the various approval processes. And there are very serious questions now for the Arts Council to answer on this. In fairness to my colleague, Minister Patrick O'Donovan, he's only been in the department a couple of weeks, and I do believe he's acted very swiftly. He briefed Cabinet on it yesterday. He's commissioned a full external review of the governance and culture at the Arts Council, which I know you've welcomed. And I can absolutely assure you, Deputy, nobody is happy with what's gone on here. When taxpayers' money is given to the Arts Council, it's exactly for the reasons that you say. to support our many brilliant artists and artistic endeavours right across our country. We don't expect it to be spent on a computer system that doesn't work, and we don't expect millions of taxpayers' money to be wasted with nothing to show for it. So there are extraordinarily serious questions for the Arts Council here. I've no doubt that, as well as the review that the Minister has initiated, it's important when the new Public Accounts Committee is established that they too, in my view, will look at this. And I've been looking myself just at even the table of the number of companies involved in this project. I think there's at least 20. I mean, spreadsheet after spreadsheet after spreadsheet of people who made significant amounts of money out of this, profited, and we don't have a computer system. So, you know, I have a very simple philosophy here. When we pay somebody to manage and to run an agency, we expect them to run it properly, and we expect them to run it in line with the public spending code. There's very serious issues that we already know of. The project cost was not properly estimated by the Arts Council, nor was any final estimate as is required under the public spending code. Between 2021 and 2024, the Arts Council approved additional budget for the project without approval from the department, as is also required under the public spending code. The Arts Council frequently changed and extended contracts with certain external suppliers, going over the allowed limit for cost increases in several cases. These actions likely contravene public procurement procedures, and additionally exceeding prescribed contract value limits without retendering also breaches EU procurement rules on substantial modifications to contracts. The Arts Council also failed to report these breaches in the Chair's letter to the Minister as required by the Code of Practice for the governance of state bodies. And let's be honest, the Arts Council has responsibility for a very significant budget, which has significantly increased objectively in recent years. So there are very serious issues here. There's also issues in relation to the Department's oversight of the Arts Council, and I don't shirk from that either, and I think that has to be a part of the review too.
Thank you, Taoiseach Deputy.
Well, I thank you for the response, Taoiseach, and I'm glad that you acknowledge that clearly there are questions here for the Department as well as for the Arts Council. And I did listen to Minister O'Donovan speaking this morning on the radio and expressing his anger and his disappointment. But we do need more than just expressions of anger and disappointment from the line Minister. We do need greater clarity on when he became aware of this. I'm conscious he is only recently in the job, but as I've said, this government contains many cabinet ministers who were also cabinet ministers in the last government. And there is a question also about levels of knowledge in the last government about this, about those timelines. We need clarity on the timelines for this review that's now been commissioned, and we need greater clarity on the timeline of events which led to this overspend. I reviewed the 2023 annual report of the Arts Council, which is now online. The report of the Chair, drafted in June of 2024, makes no mention of any of this. Artists and all of us must have confidence in the Arts Council, in its senior management and in the Department of the Arts, because as you say, there is so much public money here at stake, and it's so important that we see our artists properly supported. So we do need to ensure, in restoring that confidence, that we have a review, a really root and branch review of the Arts Council processes and internal culture, but also of the Department of the Arts oversight and public procurement rules. And I reiterate my call, Taoiseach, for a dull debate on this.
I've already said I think that would be a good idea, Deputy Bacik. I think Minister Donovan's in post around 2 weeks. Not sure he could have acted much more quickly at all. I don't think it's impossible to have acted more quickly in terms of bringing this issue to Cabinet. And just to be very clear, because you've said it twice, this issue was not brought to the attention of the previous government. It would have been preferable had it been, and as recently as this morning, I had that matter checked with both the Secretary General of the Department of Arts and with the Secretary to the government as well. It would have been preferable. I believe they believe the Department adopted a view that they were endeavouring to get on top of the issue or gather all the facts. I don't think that's a good position. It should have been highlighted at a much earlier stage. But our artists have been let down. I mean, the Arts Council does great work. The Arts Council has done great work, but they've been let down by those who are running the organisation and who've left us with this mess. Who have contravened the public spending code, and that's what the initial examination tells us. Of course, there'll have to be a full external review now. That will obviously have to be published, and we're happy to engage constructively.
Thank you, Taoiseach. We move now to his Deputy Peadar Toibin.
Good morning, the Count Corlia. Taoiseach, you say that there shouldn't be a consequence-free zone. This government is a consequence-free zone. This government is an accountability-free zone when it comes to waste. You speak about the Arts Council IT waste as some kind of shock. as if you're a passenger on the ship of state. You are at the helm of the ship of state in relation to these particular issues. I could spend the full day here giving you the litany of week after week government waste projects that have happened over the last 4 or 5 years. And there's a deep frustration amongst taxpayers at the moment at the level of government waste that's happening currently. The Arts Council incinerated €7 million of state funding, and we have nothing to show for it. And at the moment, what we have is a government, which is the same government that was in place just a few weeks ago, shrugging their shoulders and saying they don't know what happened. That's an incredible answer from any government to give. I honestly believe that there's a culture of waste that's coming from the top here, to be honest. One of the pinnacle issues of the general election, Taoiseach, was you stating that you did not sign the contract for the National Children's Hospital. This culture of evasion, of dodging, of delaying, of obfuscation is coming from the top and is seeping into every level of senior civil service at the moment as well. And, when you look at the amount of people who were involved in this, so, we had a senior minister. Where was the oversight? We had junior ministers. Where was the oversight? We have secretary generals. Where was the oversight? We had directors and chairs of the Arts Council. Where was the oversight? We had an audit committee in the Arts Council. Where was the oversight? We have loads of people getting massive wages in this country to oversee the spending of state and citizens' money, and nobody's doing their job. Nobody is doing their job. Week after week, people are cursed to wake up to the next instalment of government waste. People have had enough, Taoiseach, of this. People make jokes about the bicycle shed and they make jokes about the wall around the WRC. It's not a joke. It's disgusting what's happening to taxpayers' money at the moment, and we cannot tolerate it any further. We in Aontú have stated that there should be written into the contracts of senior civil servants that they have a responsibility to mind the taxpayers' money. We've stated that there should be a junior minister in the department of the Taoiseach who reports on live contracts to make sure that they are not going over budget and not going over time in terms of those deliveries, and that the person should report to the Taoiseach on a weekly basis so we have full oversight on what's happening. Of course, that has not been done at all. And we've stated very clearly that there has to be a cost to the senior civil servants in terms of this waste, and that cost should be, and up to including the loss of a person's job. For if there's no cost to this, there will be no change, and we will be talking about this forever.
Thank you, Deputy Taoiseach, to respond.
So certainly there's nobody on this side of the House that in any way laughs about any such matters, because you're entirely correct. They are extraordinarily serious matters. And men and women get up every morning in this country, go to work, work hard, do a hard day's work, pay their taxes, and they want to see those taxes spent well to deliver for them, for their families and for their communities. But it is also fair to say, Deputy, that when government can only be accountable for what government is told, and if there are officials in state agencies or others who are pursuing a project that doesn't adhere to the public spending code, that is not a small matter, and that cannot be and will not be a consequence-free zone. Let's be very clear. It's a very, very significant consequence for politicians. We have a thing called elections, and we put our name on a ballot paper, and people in our community go out and they choose to vote for us or they choose not to vote for us, and everyone in here, including you, receives a mandate. I think people are getting a little bit sick and tired, to put it mildly, of public money not being spent adequately, and in this case having nothing to show for it. You're right on that, and finding that there are individuals who are often somewhat anonymous in relation to those issues. Now, be very clear, I'm very clear on this too. People can make mistakes. We don't want a culture where people are risk adverse. People can make mistakes. That's different. That's absolutely different. But when a mistake is made, you got to engage. This was not that. This, in my view, was a very clear and flagrant breach of the public spending code. Now, I do want to balance my comments by saying this. Here in Ireland, we do deliver an awful lot of projects very well, and our public servants deliver a lot of projects well, on budget, on time, even ahead of time and ahead of budget on occasion. And I can also list, as you say, you can list many projects. I can also list many projects that were delivered on budget and on time, whether it's the Moycullen bypass, the Dunkettle interchange, the Listow bypass, just some in recent times, new school extensions, new primary care centres, major hospital extensions like the Mater, St Luke's Hospital in Kilkenny, the National Broadband broadband plan, which is really the modern equivalent of rural electrification, is on budget and is actually ahead of schedule currently as well. So you're quite right to, and today we should be talking about this issue in the Arts Council, I don't dispute that. But we do also deliver very many projects across the public service on time and on budget. I want to say that to be balanced in my comments. But what's happened here in the Arts Council is a cause of serious concern. And what concerns me as Taoiseach and as a coalition leader is it confined just to this project, and how can we have confidence in the overall governance structure and systems within the Arts Council, and that link that Deputy Bacik rightly made in terms of the departmental oversight of agencies. And I think what we should do here, and I think the responsible thing to do here, is exactly what Minister O'Donovan has proposed to Cabinet, is establish in the coming week an external review to get to the bottom of these matters and to report, and of course for the PAC and others to have an opportunity to examine this too.
Thank you, Deputy.
So there is a policy, I think, of sometimes hear no evil and see no evil by senior ministers. Oh, we didn't know what was happening, and you mentioned that before. It is the responsibility of the minister to know what's happening in their department. You cannot insulate yourself from crises such as this by pleading ignorance over and over again. That is not an excuse in relation to waste. It's not an excuse. Also, we don't even have the opportunity to bring in the former minister, Catherine Martin, into the Oireachtas, to bring her to a committee, because 11 weeks after the election, there are no committees. And there's not likely to be any committees for a number of weeks yet, I understand, which again shows you the dysfunction and the glacial pace of accountability within this system. This is not a victimless crime, Taoiseach. You know, when you waste, when you burn through so much money, there's a cost to that. It would have paid for 25 homes. Put 75 people into those homes. It would have paid for 600 scoliosis operations. It would have paid for 6 CAMS teams around the country. Not only are you burning up taxpayers' money, but you're taking away that critically needed cash from the people who need it most in Irish society.
Our Taoiseach to respond, please.
So I accept your passion on this matter, but I want you to know, just because perhaps I speak in maybe a calmer tone than you on occasion, please don't misunderstand that for absolute fury on the government benches in relation to this situation. The people that we represent, the people who voted for us and the mandates we've received, are extraordinarily annoyed in relation to this matter, because you're right, almost €7 million worth of taxpayers' money that was given to the Arts Council has been wasted with nothing to show for it. And what I'm saying to you as the deputy head of this government with absolute clarity today is there are going to be consequences in relation to that. We're going to establish what happened, we're going to have an external review, and then government is going to decide how to act. That's what a responsible government does. And you know what a responsible government also does? Is garner the facts. Let's do that. Let's do that. We don't need we don't need the faux outrage. What we need actually here is the facts. Gather the facts, and then government make a proper determination when we have the information. That's what I think some of your other colleagues in the opposition benches have rightly called for. We need to go through this in an external review way, and we will get to the bottom of this. But breaching the public sector spending code, public spending code, is not consequential.
Thank you, Taoiseach. We now move to questions on promised legislation, and I just want to reiterate to deputies, please stick to your time, or you're going to actually improvise on the last speakers, if not. Okay, and as soon as members leave the chamber. To begin, Deputy Pearse Doherty, Sinn Féin.
Minister, do you accept now that your government, and indeed the government that you were in charge of in the last term, has a serious problem with waste of public money? They're serial wasters, is what we're seeing from government over and over again. You talk about accountability. Name the person who was held accountable for the overspend in the Children's Hospital. Name the person who was held accountable for the bike shed, or the security hut, or the wall that costs, you know, an absolute arm and a leg. And that's the reality. It just moves on. And the question is how could this have happened? This project was initially approved by the Department of Public Expenditure. I don't know if it was Pascal Donoghue or Minister McGrath who was there at the time. And the Arts Council tell us in their annual statement, they say from July 2021, the project moved to a standing item on the Council's plenary agenda. The Department of Tourism, Culture, Arts, Gaeltacht, Sport and media have been updated and informed throughout the project. Do you believe that that is a false statement by the board in their annual statement, or do you believe that actually they were informed and just the minister didn't inform you, or what? There's a serious issue here, and we can't go through an RTE phase 2 here. We need all the information, and ministers need to tell us what the department knew, who knew, did public expenditure know, did Department of Environment know.
One of your colleagues is going to miss out because you've gone 20 seconds over your time. It's a minute and a minute. Taoiseach to respond, please.
So I've already said, Deputy Doherty, I believe this issue is very serious. I do believe we need to get to the bottom of it. I do believe people who are in well-paid positions in public bodies should be expected to deliver and be cognizant of the public sector spending code, and I believe the arts community has been let down. I do also believe that as we have an external review, there are legitimate questions in relation to the level of oversight and engagement between the department officials and the Arts Council. I think that's clear. I think it's also clear in a summary of the findings in terms of the initial review in relation to this as well. The external review.
Thank you, Taoiseach. We move now to the leader of the Labour Party, Marie Sherlock for the Labour Party.
Thank you, Ceann Comhairle. Taoiseach, when will government publish its response to the Dublin City Council, or the Dublin City Task Force report? Last October, you said it would be the end of the year when the interdepartmental working group would report back and that it would provide timelines for the plan's recommendations. So what is that timeline, and is this current government committed to all of the 10 big ideas as the previous government was, specifically to recommendation 6, which calls for a move towards a single waste management provider in the city centre via the tender process? You yourself wrote about the desperate need for a change in how we address waste in this city. Last week it was announced that the only state-run waste management company in the country is about to be sold off by Bord na Móna. We need to know what the government's plans are for waste management in this country, because it's not clear in the programme for government. And there is a bigger need with regards to the task force, with regards to housing and other issues that we need to hear about.
Yeah, I want to thank Deputy Sherlock for raising this important issue. I will get you a definitive. I don't want you to think my inability to do this today is in any way disrespectful. I just want to get you an accurate answer. There have been a number of meetings of the interdepartmental group, which is based in the Department of the Taoiseach. I think they met again as recently as last week from my memory. We're eagerly awaiting the implementation plan to come to Cabinet. I'll get you a definitive timeline for that. Certainly I am extraordinarily committed to all of the major recommendations of that report. I would just note, Ceann Comhairle, we have seen a significant increase, as you'll know as a Dublin deputy, in the Dublin City Council's investment in cleanliness across our capital city, and we do need to build on that further, but I'll write back to you directly on this.
Thank you, Taoiseach. Next, the Soc Dems, which is Deputy Aidan Farrell.
Taoiseach, it is truly mind-boggling that the Arts Council could spend nearly €7 million on an IT system and have nothing to show for it. What is worse is that your last 2 governments allowed them to get away with it. At the outset in 2018, the full cost of the project was not included in the business case. This was a major breach of the public spending code. As the project spiralled out of control, with the budget ballooning from 2.87 million to nearly 7 million, the department was kept fully informed, but no one shouted stop. A review of this fiasco has found the Arts Council Board didn't have sufficient expertise to manage this project. But any gaps in expertise are the fault of the Minister who appoints to the board. As recently as October 29th, a month before the election, former Green Party Minister Catherine Martin was making appointments to this board. Why didn't she mention anything about this then? Is it because all of her efforts were focused on burying this scandal until after the election? Taoiseach, Minister O'Donovan has now ordered an external review of governance and culture at the Arts Council. A nice way to kick to touch for a while. But what about governance and culture in your government and the department? When will we see an external review of them and the appalling litany of public waste money that they have presided over?
Taoiseach to respond.
Thanks,
Same
Deputy.
thing, Deputy, someone else's time.
Thanks, Deputy Farrelly, and on my first occasion interacting, congratulations on your election. I think the Minister has done. I think if the Minister had done anything yesterday other than what he did, I think it would have been irresponsible. I think establishing an external review is exactly how you achieve what you wish to achieve in terms of clarity in relation to the role of the department, the role of the Arts Council, and the timelines and interactions between the two. I do also want to say, because I'm conscious former Deputy Martin is no longer a member of this House, but I knew her to be an honourable and diligent colleague as well.
Thank you, Taoiseach. Independent Parties Grouping, Deputy Ken Flynn.
Thank you, Ceann to ask the Taoiseach. First of all, could I just welcome to the gallery the large contingency from Cork North Central of members of Independent Ireland. The Mallow swimming pool is closing on March 1st for upgrades for 9 months. That will, while that's a welcome decision, it does cause a big problem for the community I live in. Mallow, a large town, which has many people use the pool. It's important to the clubs, the schools and older people. For example, the Mallow Swan Swimming Club, 225 members, aged 7 to 19. They They use the pool every day. These young swimmers are learning to swim, training for competitions, and some of them are competing or hope to be competing as Irish Olympians in the future. The problem now is that the nearest swimming pool is 30 kilometres away. We have a 9 months delay on that, Taoiseach. The pools that are available in Cork are taken up with their own clubs in Cork City. The only other options are hotel pools. Now, if you go to the hotel pools, you're looking at going from a cost of running this club from 6,500 to 16,000 euros per month. I'm asking the Taoiseach, will the government make additional monies available to Cork County Council to facilitate these clubs before they close down? Because they'll have no other option. Thank you, Taoiseach.
Thank you, Deputy Taoiseach.
Well, thanks to Deputy Flynn. I welcome your colleagues from Cork North Central to the Dáil. And look, I suppose the government is very proud to be in a position to invest significant more money in sports infrastructure for all the reasons you say in terms of the health and well-being of our people, but also the great progress that we're seeing in terms of competing at international events like the Olympics. I'm not across the detail in relation to the Mallow swimming pool, but I will certainly inquire with the Minister for Sport and ask that he writes to you directly on the matter.
Thank you, Taoiseach. Lest anyone think Deputy Flynn has swapped to grouping, he hasn't. I made a mistake. So it's now the Independent Parties grouping Deputy Brian Stanley.
They only join us.
Thank you.
Thanks, Corla. The proposed sale of Portnamona Taoiseach of the recycling business and the waste management business, including the facility at Portlaoise to a private company, must be halted. If it goes ahead, it will mean the transfer of a large recycling and waste recovery business going from public ownership into the hands of a private investor. And it creates a whole new situation for the workforce and customers. The workforce are supposed to be receiving guarantees, but you and I know that terms and conditions can't be maintained out into the future in a year or 2 years or 3 years' time. They cannot be by a private company. So it's proposed to sell it to KWD. It's an unlimited company. It doesn't have to publish annual accounts. SIP2 has called for a halt because they say it's counter to best economic and environmental best practices. The workers have been balloted for strike action if the sale goes ahead. I'm asking you to intervene, to speak directly with Minister Darragh O'Brien, who is the sole shareholder on behalf of the public that owned it,
Thank
and
you,
intervene
Deputy.
and
Thank
halt
you,
the
Deputy.
sale of
Another
this
member's
strategic
time,
state
Deputy.
assets.
Thank you, Taoiseach.
Well, thanks very much to Deputy Stanley for raising this important issue, and I have indeed heard of the concern that it is causing in your community and in Offaly. What I'd suggest I'll do is ask in Laois and Offaly. What I'd suggest I do is ask Minister O'Brien, as the Minister with responsibility for this area, to engage with you directly.
Thank you, Taoiseach. Deputy James O'Connor, not with us. Deputy Michael Carrigy.
The programme for government states that we will design a statutory home care scheme to allow people to stay in their homes for as long as possible. In my own home county, Longford, I have numerous families who are struggling to look after their family members. Based on medical need, they're being allocated hours, but the reality is there is actually no staff there employed by the HSE to provide these hours. Families are now looking at applying and looking for fair deal and nursing home care for their family relatives, which will ultimately cost the state more money. When will we see a home care scheme in place to look after those elderly people in Longford and in communities throughout the country? Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Taoiseach.
Well, I want to thank Deputy Carrigy for raising this issue and for his persistent work on this in relation to people in Longford and in Westmeath. We saw last year Longford and Westmeath over 660,000 hours delivered in terms of home help hours, and that was more than 51,000 additional hours ahead of target. Funding has been provided for this year to at least maintain that level of service, and I'm pleased to also tell the Deputy that a recruitment campaign is currently underway in Longford Westmeath for healthcare support assistance, because so often this is not just a funding issue, as you know, it's a staffing issue. You are right though, and more fundamentally, and I see Minister O'Donnell here is our Minister for Older People. More fundamentally, we want to introduce a statutory home care scheme. At the moment, it's not right that the only statutory scheme at the moment in terms of how we care for older people is the nursing home scheme. We need to provide a statutory scheme for people to get care in their home. It's in the programme for government, and Minister O'Donnell will progress it.
Thank you, Taoiseach. Deputy Rory O'Murrico.
Taoiseach, not for the first time I brought up the issue of Irish unity and the necessity to do the preparatory work, and also that we need a forum to deal with those questions questions on what New Ireland would look like. But I've spoken to you before about cross-border issues, and you spoke about the need for there to be a hub that would deal with these sort of issues. So I'd ask if there's any movement on that. I've spoken obviously about the taxation issues for remote workers, but I've spoken to the Minister for Transport lately in relation to taxi tour services working cross-border, and also hauliers that are an issue around the derogation on the Gen 2V2 tachograph retrofit. But specifically, a huge amount of shared island funding has gone into Magee College. I was a parent who has a student doing a healthcare course up there, can't get Susie, just above, but they try to get the tax relief on accommodation. But because the kid obviously is going to college in the north, this is an issue. I think it's an anomaly. We're talking about shared island. It needs to be looked at.
Thank you, Deputy.
Well, thanks very much to Deputy O'Murricu for raising this issue. And can I say this government is determined to work on an all-island basis on so many issues that it quite frankly makes sense to do that. I've already been to Belfast, met with the First Minister, the Deputy First Minister and a number of political leaders, and we have specifically in the programme for government committed very substantial additional funding to grow shared island projects in the years ahead. I'm pleased you referenced Magee. It's going to be an incredible investment in education and third level education in Derry. But I think you're right, as we come across those issues and anomalies, and I thank you for bringing them up. We'll certainly reflect on them. Happy to engage on a north-south basis through the Ministerial Council on them. And the specific issues you've raised, I'll ask each relevant government minister to look at them too.
Thank you, Taoiseach. Deputy Colin Burke.
Thank you, Taoiseach, currently in the Cork-Kerry region, in the audiology services, there are 2,619 people waiting for appointments. Currently, it's 117 weeks from the time a GP or a health specialist refers them in for an appointment. 117 weeks is the waiting time before they'll get an appointment. And I'm really concerned in that we have only 14.2 audiologists working in the Cork-Kerry region. It's no longer adequate. There's also a strong link between hearing loss and the early onset of dementia. And I'm asking Taoiseach, what action is going to be taken in order to deal with this waiting list? Remember, if you're 82, you'll be 85 by the time you get an appointment. That's the type of problem that we're now facing, and I'm asking that immediate action would be taken on the matter.
Thank you, Deputy Taoiseach.
I want to thank Deputy Burke for raising this issue in relation to audiology services in Cork. I'm informed that there's two factors particularly impacting the waiting lists in Cork. One is obviously the issue of demand in terms of our population, our ageing population. That's something that we should be able to plan for. But secondly is a specific issue regarding recruitment pressures. The Department of Health and the HSE are now working together to remedy this with a new National Hearing Care Plan. And the Minister for Health established a working group to develop that last August. This is jointly chaired by the Department of Health and the HSE, and membership of the working group is drawn from relevant stakeholders, including the Irish Society of Hearing Aid Audiologists, the Irish Academy of Audiology and the Department of Social Protection. And I'll ask Minister Carol McNeill to directly link with Deputy Burke in relation to that work and how we can make progress in Cork.
Thank you, Taoiseach. Deputy Pádraig O'Sullivan.
Taoiseach, can I just maybe ask you about today's announcement that Event Money and An Post are also joining the government's backed scheme for the home energy upgrade. While it's most welcome and people will be able to get their loans up front and commence the works at the start, I would like that the government would review the fact that people at the moment have to often replace their entire heating system, that they can't avail possibly of stoves and so on. I think it's something we need to reflect on to possibly get it included in the scheme, because as I said, there's lots of elderly people in particular that wouldn't have access to the type of money that would require us to replace the full heating system in some cases. And it's just that that would be looked at into the future.
Thank you, Deputy Taoiseach.
Yeah, I think the Deputy makes a very good point, Deputy O'Sullivan. I think we need to reflect on some of this again. I mean, stoves would have been very helpful in many houses during the recent storm. And I think we have to show more flexibility, I believe, rather than ideology when it actually comes to delivering these initiatives. We have a climate emergency. We're deadly serious about making progress on it. But where there's people willing and wanting to do their part to help with their home, I think we have to meet them halfway. And it's a very big upheaval in somebody's home, particularly at an older stage of life, trying to find that sum of money. And like I say, we've all appreciated the stoves in the last number of weeks as well.
Thank you, Taoiseach. Deputy Paul Donnelly.
I want to talk about the Blanchardstown Centre for Independent Living, and there's a lot of laudable references to disability services in the programme for government. But I want to outline in 2018 they provided a service for 36 home support, 36 people, it's now in 2024 to 150. Transport, 33 people availed of the services, it's now 302. Maintenance, 21, it's now 40 people in 2024. And just to outline in 2018, the HSE provided 72,208 in funding. In 2024, it's 74,232. So there's a massive increase in the amount of people who are availing of the service, in fact being referred by the HSE themselves to this service in Dublin 15, and yet there's only been an increase of €2,000 in those 6 years. It's something we have to look at. These people absolutely need that service and they need the